Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Math with Dr. War. Today's lesson is for the college students and we're going to be solving quadratics by completing the square. Let's begin. Now, completing the square is not very difficult. I'm going to show you some easy shortcuts to get your answer pretty quickly. I have k squared plus 8k plus 12 equals to 0. Your first step is to have variables on one side and your constant on the other. So this positive 12 here, we need to remove it. We need to take it over to the other side. Now, if you take it over the equal sign, I'm going to get k squared plus 8k equals negative 12. Your first step in completing the square is that we need to find half of your b, and your b is your 8. So I'm going to put a little bubble around it. We're going to have to find half of 8. Half of 8 is 4. You're then going to square it and you're going to add it to both sides of your equation. So remember, on the left hand side we had k squared plus 8k. Now we're going to add the 4 all squared. On the right hand side I had negative 12 and I'm also going to add the 4 all squared. Whatever you add to the left, you must add to the right. So remember, after you take your constant over to the other side, you're going to take half of your b, which is the k, and then you're going to square it. Do not evaluate this. Leave it as 4 squared. The reason I leave it as 4 squared and don't write 16 is because you have to factor the left-hand side and we're going to evaluate the right-hand side. Now, I find that some students are not strong at factoring really quickly, so I say leave it as the 4 squared. The reason is that when I come to factor this, all I do is I open the parentheses, I'm going to put in a k, and then I'm going to put in a plus 4, because the 4 is positive, all squared. Because this is what we would call a perfect trinomial. The first term is perfect, and the last term is perfect. So it's just k plus 4 all squared. Over on the right hand side, I have negative 12 plus 4 squared is 16. And when I evaluate negative 12 plus 16, I get 4. So I have k plus 4 all squared equals to 4. Now remember, we're solving. So your next step is you're going to take the square root of both sides because we want to find k. So I'm taking the square root of k plus 4 all squared, and I'm taking the square root of 4. The square and the square root cancel each other, leaving you with just k plus 4. Now, because it's a quadratic, you're going to have two answers because you have k squared. When you take the square root of 4, you're going to get 2, but you must put plus or minus in front of it. And then solving for k, I'm going to have to subtract 4 on both sides, or you can think about, okay, I'm taking this positive 4 over the equal sign. You're going to get negative 4. So k has a value of negative 4, which is plus or minus 2. So k is either negative 4 plus 2, which gives you a value of negative 2, or k is equals to negative 4 minus 2, which is negative 6. So your answer for k is either negative 2 or negative 6. I have a squared minus 2a minus 48 equals to 0. So remember, we want the variables on one side and the constant on the other. So the a squared minus the 2a is going to stay equals. Now the negative 48, we're going to take it over to the right hand side. Now because it was negative, when it goes over, it becomes a positive 48. Remember, we're going to take half of your b. Now your b is negative 2. So I'm taking half of negative 2. Half of negative 2 is negative 1. So remember, take the sign that is in front of your b. And remember, we're going to have to square it, and then you're going to have to add it to both sides. So I get a squared minus 2a plus negative 1 all squared equals to 48 and I'm going to add -1 all squared. Now remember, on this side we have to factor, but because we set it up like this, factoring is easy. It's just the a and the -1 and all that squared equals to 48 plus, and if you square -1, it's just 1, so that's 48 plus 1 is 49. I have a minus 1 all squared equals to 49. And remember, we're solving for a, so we're going to have to take the square root of both sides. Now the square cancels the square root, so you just have a minus 1. However, since 49 is perfect, the square root of 49 is 7, and don't forget your plus or minus. And solving for a, you're going to add 1 to both sides. So a has a value of 1 plus or minus 7. So a is either 1 plus 7, which is 8, or a is 1 minus 7, which is -6. So your value for a is either 8 or -6. I'm just going to write it like that. So these ones, you had real roots. We have x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals to 0. So remember, we're going to get rid of this -24, take it to the right. You're going to get x squared minus 5x equals to a positive 24, because on the left-hand side it was negative. When it goes to the right-hand side, it becomes positive. Now remember, we have to take a half of your b. So if I take a half of that, that's -5/2. Because you can't really half 5, so you're going to write it as a fraction. This is where students get scared because they don't like fractions. So when I half -5, it's -5/2 because it can't divide evenly. And remember, we got to square it. And we're going to add it to both sides. So this will be x squared minus 5x plus, and this will be -5/2 all squared. And remember, we're going to have to add it to the other side. So this will be 24 plus -5/2 all squared. Okay, remember we have to factor this, but it's easy. It's going to be the x with the -5/2, and then you're going to square. Over here, we're going to have to evaluate. This will be 24 plus, and if you square -5/2, -5 squared is 25, and if you square 2, you get 4. Now we have to evaluate that. I know you all don't like fractions, but since you're in intermediate algebra class, you can use a calculator. So get your calculator if you don't like fractions. Let me move my calculator over. So make sure you get a calculator that can actually do fractions. I find students like to go get the TI-84, and then they don't even know where the fraction function is. If you know where it is, great, but don't go get that calculator if you don't know where to find the fractions. Right before a test, they're asking me, how do you find fractions again? So this calculator would work perfectly fine for that class. So you get 24 plus, and then 25/4, and I'm going to go to the right, and I hit enter. Notice my answer is 121/4. So that's 121/4. And remember, to solve for the x, we're going to have to take the square root of both sides. And I'm going to take the square root of 121/4. This would just be x minus 5/2 equals this, plus or minus. Now, if you take the square root of 121, you get 11. And if you take the square root of 4, you get 2. Again, remember, you're using a calculator as well. So if you get this right here, you can go second function square root, and then second function answer, because that's your answer. And when you hit enter, 11/2. Now solving for x, and this is simple. Instead of doing the plus, remember you're taking this, the -5/2, over on the other side. So x would equals to, since that was negative, when it goes over, it's going to become positive 5/2 plus or minus 11/2. So your answer for x is either 5/2 plus 11/2, and this is easy. Because the denominators are the same, you're just going to add the numerators. So 5 plus 11, that would give you 16 over 2. 16 divided by 2 is 8. So one of your answers could be 8. And the other one, you have x would be equals to 5 over 2 minus 11 over 2. So x has a value of negative 6 over 2. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. So your answer here is either negative 3 or 8. So don't be scared of the fractions. They're not that difficult. Here I have m squared minus 4m plus 10 equals to 0. Again, let's take that 10 over to the right. You're going to get m squared minus 4m equals negative 10. Okay, remember we need to half the negative 4. So I always write this, half. Half of negative 4 is negative 2, and then square it. And add it to both sides. So you have m squared minus 4m plus negative 2 all squared equals to negative 10 plus your negative 2 all squared. Now you can factor this because it's simple. It's just going to be the m minus the 2 all squared. And then over here, this is negative 10 plus negative 2 squared is 4. So you have m minus 2 all squared equals, and negative 10 plus 4 gives you negative 6. Solving for the m, you're going to have to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root of m minus 2 all squared, and I'm taking the square root of negative 6. The square cancels the square root, leaving you with m minus 2 equals, and remember when you take the square root, you're going to get plus or minus. Now remember my complex numbers videos? The square root of the negative is your I, and then you can't take the square root of 6. And then we're solving for m, so we want m all by itself, so this minus 2, we're going to have to take over the equal sign. So m is going to equal, since it was a negative, when it goes to the right, it's going to become a positive. So it's going to be 2 plus or minus I square root 6. So your value for m is going to have imaginary roots. So this will be 2 plus I square root 6, or m is going to be 2 minus I square root 6. So you can get real roots or you can get imaginary roots. I have 2x squared minus 4x minus 3 equals to 0. Always remember that when you're completing the square, your value or the coefficient in front of the x squared should be a 1. So we need to get rid of this 2. So we're going to divide every 1 by 2. That's going to leave me with x squared minus 2x minus 3 over 2, because that can't divide evenly, equals to 0. Remember, we want the x's on one side and the constant on the other. So I'm going to get x squared minus 2x equals, now remember this was negative, so when it goes over, it's going to be positive 3 over 2. And remember your b, you're going to take half of negative 2, which is negative 1, and you're going to square it. And this number you're going to add to both sides. So you're going to have x squared minus 2x plus negative 1 all squared. And then over here, this will be 3 over 2 plus negative 1 all squared. When you factor the left-hand side, it's just going to be x minus 1 all squared equals, and the right-hand side would be 3 over 2 plus negative 1 squared is 1. And when you add that, that will become 5 over 2. But again, if you don't like fractions, because I know a lot of students don't, just get your calculator, and then you take 3 over 2 and add it to 1. You get 5 over 2. So I have x minus 1 all squared equals to 5 over 2. Remember, I have to square both sides. Now this is where it gets interesting. So the square cancels the square root. So I get x minus 1 equals, now remember this will be plus or minus. And can you take the square root of 5? Can you take the square root of 2? The answer is no. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this up. So I'm going to write it as square root 5 over square root 2. Now, I'm still working over here on the right-hand side. Remember I had a video of rationalizing the denominator? Well, this is where it comes in handy. So if you have square root 5 over square root 2, because remember, we don't want any square roots in the denominator. To rationalize, you would multiply top and bottom by square root 2. So the top becomes square root 10 over 2. So this I'm going to write as plus or minus square root 10 over 2. So I have x minus 1 equals to plus or minus square root 10 over 2. And solving for x, we need to get rid of this 1. And when I take it over, I'm going to get x equals to 1 plus or minus square root 10 over 2. Now, depending on your professor, this would be fine. But some professors don't like their answers like this. So if I have 1 plus or minus square root 10 over 2, I put this over 1, and this is what I do next. I multiply the denominators. 1 times 2 is 2, like that. And then I multiply across, so 2 times 1 is 2, plus or minus. And then the 1 here multiplies the square root 10, so that's just square root 10. So some professors like their answer like this, and some will accept it as this 1 plus or minus square root 10 over 2. Okay, last and final one. Again, we have negative 2x squared plus 4x minus 5 equals to 0. Remember, when you're completing the square, the coefficient in front of the x squared should be a 1. So I have to go here and divide every one by negative 2. So this becomes x squared. Now be careful with your signs. This will become negative 2x. And then 2 negatives become a positive. So that will be a positive 5 over 2 equals to 0. Remember, have all your variables on the left. So that will be x squared minus 2x. And take the constant over to the right. Now because it's positive, when you take it over, it becomes negative. Remember, we have to half negative 2. So half of negative 2 is negative 1. And you have to square that. And we're going to add it to both sides. So this is x squared minus 2x plus negative 1 all squared equals to negative 5 over 2 plus negative 1 all squared. This is easy to factor, just your x, the minus 1 all squared. And then over here, this will be negative 5 over 2 plus 1. And I have x minus 1 all squared equals, this will be negative 5 over 2, and you need to add it to 1. Seems like I just wrote back that same line. Again, if you don't like your fractions, take out your calculator, because I know you can use it in the class. So you have negative 5 over 2. And then I'm adding 1 to that. I'm getting negative 3 over 2. So this will be x minus 1 all squared equals to negative 3 over 2. Remember, we have to take the square root of both sides. This will be just x minus 1 equals, and again, you're going to have plus or minus. When you take the square root of the negative, you get I, so this is turning out to be imaginary. And then the 3 is not perfect and the 2 is not perfect, so I'm going to break it up, and it's going to be square root 3 over square root 2. But remember, we need to rationalize. So square root 3 over square root 2. When you rationalize, I did a video on rationalizing. You should be able to by now. You're going to get square root 6 over 2. So this will be x minus 1 equals to plus or minus I square root 6 over 2. And then because you're solving for x, we need to get rid of this negative 1, take it over. So this will be x equals to 1 plus or minus square root 6 over 2. Again, depending on your professor, this might be fine. Some professors might want you to write it like this. So here's my little trick again. 1 plus or minus, ooh, I forgot my I square root 6 over 2. Okay, I'm going to make this over 1, like that. I'm going to draw my line. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 1 is 2. Plus 1 times this is going to still stay itself. So this will be I square root 6. And there's your answer. In my class, this was okay for me. Some professors want you to go here. I hope this was helpful with solving quadratics to complete the square. You're going to need to complete the square when you have to find the equation of a circle. So it is very important. Have a good day.